Hello, thanks for joining. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you. Okay, so we'll get started in about a minute. I see that the Councilman Panzeri is on. If you'd like to say anything in the beginning of the meeting, just feel free to raise your hand and I'll promote you to panelist, Councilwoman. And if not, we can put you on later in the meeting if you'd like to say anything.
Just very briefly, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and for being able to pivot last minute because we've got some inclement weather here that looks like we've not been hit as hard as other parts of the state. Liz, Matt, Francisco, thank you guys for putting this together, and we look forward to seeing the presentation.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Okay, so we'll get started. Thanks for joining us tonight and pivoting to the virtual format. Given tonight's weather, Councilwoman Panzeri and Brittany, thank you for getting the word out about this meeting. My name is Liz Oper. I'm an urban designer from the Division of City Planning. I'm joined tonight by my colleagues Francisco Espinoza and Matt Ward, our supervising planner. So let's see. So just letting you know, this meeting will be recorded. We'll share the meeting link, the recording link with you online, as well as this presentation. So for just wanted to give you a quick overview of tonight's meeting format. We will quickly go over some aspects of the master plan, the current zoning for the area, existing conditions, the way the zoning has evolved over time, what the recommendations are, some recent approvals in the area, and moving into what are the next steps and opening this up for discussion and Q&A. And what we will see how many of us there end up being by the time we get to Q&A. If it's a manageable amount, maybe we'll just put everybody up as a panelist so we could all see each other and discuss. Okay. So we recently adopted an update to our master plan. The land use element was one of the elements that were updated in this effort, which provided many zoning recommendations. City planning is studying these recommendations and we'll be bringing them to the planning board in different groups or phases. Phase 1 was focused on corrective zoning. You may have went to some of those previous meetings, and the efforts of phase 1 were adopted in September 2022. Something that you might be familiar with, as there's an RC1 on Mallory Ave, was looking at some of these RC districts. And then phase 2 of our effort, which is what we're doing now, will focus on recommendations to the R1 and other low-rise residential zones. So right now we're in phase 2 of our efforts with the master plan. A master plan is made up of many elements. I've already mentioned the land use element. Other elements include the open space, housing, circulation, and there are others. Each of these elements had their own recommendations. As a part of our recent update, we reviewed all of the master plan elements and identified common goals between the elements. Those goals were then framed as lenses. Those lenses are connectivity and mobility, economic opportunity, social equity, and climate resiliency, allowing the master plan vision document to synthesize overarching goals and recommendations and kind of put something more cohesive and clear forward. So all of these things are connected and tied together and shape each other. Okay, so let's get started on what the current zoning is for the area. The current zoning is commercial automotive. Communipaw Avenue from 440 to Bergen Avenue is currently zoned commercial automotive. We'll often refer to it as CA, and that's what you'll see it as in the zoning maps. This is the only area of the city that has this zoning, so it's pretty unique to this area. Today, we're just specifically focusing on the area of Communipaw between Mallory and Bergen Avenue. We're recommending that we look at this area for rezoning, and that the western portion from 440 to Mallory Avenue would be better suited for redevelopment. There's a majority landowner there. There are other small home property owners as well, but it is one majority owner. This way we can look at the lot at the block as a comprehensive vision. These lots are also through lots, meaning that they have 2 front yards. And then the lot depths, they're not typical. So a lot of those lot depths are less than 100. So the conversation today is going to focus on Communipaw Avenue between Mallory and Bergen. Okay. This slide discusses what is currently permitted and required under the existing commercial automotive zoning. The uses are listed here. They're mostly limited to retail and auto sales and services. All categories of restaurants are permitted, along with offices. Buildings are permitted to be 30 feet tall with a 5-foot rear yard. They're also permitted a pretty high coverage at 90%. There are some standards specifically around garage bays. They're not conditions that we really see on the ground. I think they were put in place after seeing how some of these auto uses come to fruition. So the standards allow for 50% of the frontage to contain garage doors, which essentially permits curb cuts for 50% of the building frontage. It's also required that the garage doors be set back 20 feet from the front yard lot line. And you'll see what happens now is that many of these doors, the garage doors, open right up onto the property line. So I'll just switch to a different document for one moment. So we can see some photos of that here. You can see that the existing uses and current zoning do not allow for a pedestrian-friendly environment. There are a lot of vehicles that mount the sidewalks, some of which are there for extended periods of time while they're being serviced. It can be difficult and unpleasant to walk here, and given the proximity to the park and Westside Avenue shopping, this area should be much more walkable. And yeah, just wanted to share some additional images highlighting the various uses along this corridor. So you'll see drive-through restaurants, apartment buildings with ground floor commercial, and some different auto uses, which we've already discussed. So now I'll pass it over to Francisco, who will walk us through the evolution of the zoning.
All right, so with the Communipaw zoning evolution, this is specifically about uses. So prior to 1963, the 1963 zoning, warehouses and industrial uses were the primary uses on this stretch of Communipaw. And you can see that industrial history when walking the avenue today. But moving to 1963 zoning regulations, this was the business district B zone. So it permitted retail businesses of any kind, apartment houses, and limited commercial uses. It did prohibit any manufacturing or light industrial, gas filling stations, and public garages. Moving forward to the 1974 zoning regulation, this was zoned as a C2 office retail. So it mainly permitted office, retail, garden and mid-rise apartments, auto service stations, auto sales, as well as parking, garages, and lots. And then moving forward into 2000 with the master plan, it described this area as a community commercial space and commercial automotive area. And you can see that a lot of the uses are what today is, which is permitting retail sales of goods and services, a lot of auto centric sales, and restaurants, including all categories, as well as offices. Next slide. And then in terms of the bulk, so the 1963 zoning regulations, maximum height was allowed to go to 105 feet. And this is embedded into the 1963 ordinance where they allowed it's a 1.5 times the right-of-way width. And in this case, Communipaw's right-of-way width is 70. So mainly allowed for 10 stories to go on the stretch of Communipaw. The minimum height was only allowed up to 15 feet. And then there was a minimum rear yard of 6 feet. In 1974, the zoning regulations pretty much kept it the same in terms of maximum building height. It did decrease the feet in terms of the 100 feet that was allowed to go up, but the 10 stories will still remain the same. In terms of area, yard, and bulk of the building, if a building was 4 or more stories, the minimum lot width would be 150, the lot depth was 100, side yard was either 15 or 0.25, whichever was greater. The front yard was allowed to set back at 0, so there wasn't really a front yard setback. The rear yard was at 30, and the maximum was a FAR of 2. In terms of area, yard, and bulk of buildings for buildings that were less than 4 stories, the minimum requirements were a lot width of 25 feet, a lot depth of 100 feet. Again, the side yard remained the same, so it was 0, and the rear yard was 25. In terms of maximum, the buildings were allowed to have a building coverage of 80%. And then moving forward into what the zone is currently today, the maximum building height is 30 feet. The minimum rear yard is 5 feet. The maximum front yard setback is 5 feet. And then the maximum lot and building coverage is 90%. Next slide. So these two photos are historic map photos. On your left, you can see highlighted in this orange yellowish color. This is the zone we are talking about. So it's the stretch from Mallory to Bergen. And in 1957, it was zoned for a business district. And then in 1974, you can see it was rezoned to include the RC2. Sorry, the C2.
Great. Okay, so we're going to jump into what's recommended for this area. These recommendations are coming from the master plan land use element. So we're recommending rezoning Communipaw Avenue between Mallory and Bergen. The land use element recommends 2 different things for this area. So you could see on the bottom right here that there's some area highlighted in orange and some area highlighted in pink. In orange is what the land use team was recommending that we zone NC, which is neighborhood commercial. This is an existing zone in the city, and we would simply bring that zoning to this area. So the NC zoning, many uses are permitted. It's very pedestrian oriented. with commercial and retail to support the surrounding neighborhood, and a maximum height of 5 stories. Going west between Mallory and West Side, the master plan was looking at this area as gateway commercial. And you might have heard gateway commercial. That might have been some verbiage that you heard that brought you here tonight. This was a new zone that was recommended by the land use team. And we'll get into some more details on how we're interpreting that moving forward. But the recommendations with the gateway commercial are pretty in line with some of the neighborhood commercial objectives. So improving the pedestrian realm, lessening some of the nuisance impacts. So cars and the sidewalks, for example, reduce drive-in commercial activities in favor of uses oriented to the street, and looking at a 5 or 6 story development. So to get into the NC zoning for the area between West Side and Bergen, we're looking to part of the master plan recommended exploring different scales of NC. So this area we're recommending to keep at the current scale of NC. We're going to call that NC1. As we said, many uses are permitted. But the current NC zoning, and you'll have access to this link following this presentation. Some areas with NC zoning currently in this area, near to this area that you may be familiar with, are the Junction, portions of West Side Avenue, and McGinley Square. Again, many uses are permitted, nothing industrial, ground floor commercial, and residential uses above. Max height of 5 stories, a rear yard of 15% of the lot depth. So that's a much larger rear yard than the commercial automotive permits or requires. And parking is the approach to parking is to limit the amount of curb cuts. So just to be very strategic in where curb cuts are located and how large they are. And then looking at some parking standards that are used in a few different areas with it that have NC zoning, either 0.2 or 0.3 spaces per bedroom. And that can be determined off of the geography. So that's currently there's currently a precedent for that there's different parking requirements based on where you are in the city. So we can work with you to see what we think the need may be there. And then for the area slightly further to the west between Mallory and West Side, we're interpreting that this new gateway commercial zone would essentially be an NC zone. So we think this would be like the NC that we just discussed. However, a little bit taller. So right now the master plan recommends that this area can go up to 6 stories. Would be appropriate, and then we could also consider some additional uses, perhaps a hotel use. And I'll pass that over to you, Francisco.
Sure. So what has recently been approved here? So in this slide, this is a bird's eye view of the area, and just to get everyone oriented with where we are in the map, on your left, it's West Side Avenue near the Checkers. And on your right, you'll have Mallory near the McDonald's on Communipaw. Now, these 3 proposals were already approved by the Zoning Board of Adjustments. The first one on your left was approved in 2020, and the next 2 on your right were approved, I believe, last year, so 2021. And I'll go through each project starting with the white box on your left. So this is 847 through 849 Communipaw. It is at 6 stories and it has 35 units. In the middle, you'll see 859 Communipaw. This is 6 stories and 90 units. And then lastly, 869 Communipaw. It is 6 stories and 70 units. So now this aligns with what the NC2 would allow. And we just wanted to show everyone sort of a visual of what the future buildings could possibly look like on Communipaw with this type of zone in terms of height.
Yeah, and it's the same segment of Communipaw that we had just discussed, this NC2 space spanning between Mallory and West Side.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's our introduction and review for tonight. We are planning to share a draft with everybody and the rest of the larger community, probably sometime in February with this language. We'll share the draft. We'll publish it. We have all of your emails now as you've attended this meeting, and we'll give everybody some time to review. And if there's a lot of questions and looks like there's interest in a second meeting, we'll host a second meeting. And yes, you can feel free to reach out to myself or Francisco. Our email addresses are up here. We'll open it up to Q&A. We're a pretty small group, so I think I'll just promote everybody to panelist. And then if you don't want to be on camera or you don't want to talk, you don't have to accept this. So I will do that now. Let's see if that's easy to do at that scale. Francisco, are you co-host? Maybe I could ask you to help me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you want me to?
Okay, I'm making you co-host.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just leave this slide up for if everybody just bear with us for a couple minutes while we get you all on here. You can feel free to, if you would like, you can check out this QR code. It'll take you to some info on our data portal. So you'll start to get notices if we're asking to promote you to panelist. If you're not comfortable, you do not have to. I'm starting from the bottom, Francisco.
Okay, I started at the top, so that works.
Sweet. Okay, so we'll just give that another moment.
Yeah, it's a little laggy, so it might delay.
Yeah.
I don't get this.
Hello. Yeah, so sorry this is taking a little while, but we're trying to just promote whoever would like to share their face with us. No pressure if you don't want to, but and if we haven't gotten to you and you would like to get up on the screen, just raise your hand and we'll try to get you on.
Yeah, it definitely helps if you raise your hand so we know exactly who to promote.
Yeah, I think I tried as I did what I could on my end, but yeah, if you would like to come on, feel free to just raise your hand and we'll get you up here. If not, I think we can get started with our conversation on this end. Colin, I see that you have your hand raised. If you'd like to jump into any comments or questions.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Thanks for this presentation and for the forum. So I'm wondering, with the change, how the streetscape might be affected. Will there be more, additional setback requirements to make more room for sidewalks? Pedestrian access from the south side of Communipaw to the park is pretty challenging. And any additional like residential uses that are realized. What are we going to do what considerations are being made to make sure everyone stays safe?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So yes, we would look to ensure that we have sufficiently wide sidewalks. So some of the images that we shared, you can kind of see that I think it's like an 8-foot sidewalk, but then once the utility poles are in, you're looking at 5. There's not a lot of street trees. It's a difficult walk. So yeah, the goal would be to make this a much more pedestrian friendly, accessible route. And in order to do that with this particular area, we would have to require a front yard setback. And then, yeah, just to your point about entering and accessing the park from the south, we think those improvements those changes will help greatly. And hopefully, you know, once it gets to a certain point, we can increase, well, we could probably do this regardless, but increase signage and pedestrian indicators. Hey, Jean.
Oh, am I on?
Yep, you're on. Hi.
Oh, geez, excuse me. I'm so sorry. I guess some of the things that I was that caught my interest, or not my concern, but you were several questions. You were speaking to about a primary property. Could you, so that's one issue I would like some more information about this primary property owner. And was curious if the primary property owner, excuse me, reached out to you guys to ask for the rezoning, because what I've noticed in some of the planning board that there are developers who are reaching out to you asking for changes to the zoning. So I was just curious if you could just sort of fill me in on about that type of aspect of this plan.
Sure. So the master plan, the land use element in which that recommendation did not spur from any conversations with the landowner, but the land use element team in their recommendations asked us to review this corridor. So that's kind of the initiating point. And then we're at the point now where we're going in and saying, okay, which of these recommendations do we think are important to move forward? And as these 4 blocks, we know that there's significant ownership here. So once we decided we want to look at rezoning, we reached out to that landowner because they own so much of the strip. So it was just to get a feel if how they would feel about this rezoning.
And are you able to share some of the comments that were made?
Yeah, I think they're also very interested. So this ownership is they own a lot of the car dealerships. So there's the Hyundai, the Chevy, all of those, and that's portion between 440 and Mallory. Yeah, they're very interested in a much more walkable, accessible environment. They're recognizing that there's changes to the auto industry where they don't have to have so much cars parked on site. So yeah, I think they're definitely interested in a lot of these changes or these ideas. Yeah.
I guess one thing if they own all the property, it might be Cernio because he's got that automotive place. But do you know what I'm concerned would be if he does have tenants, let's say, that are running auto body shops? My concern would be for them and the relocation of their shops, because that would be very, very disappointing to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly leases that are probably in place for a lot of companies that don't own their own properties, and zoning and a change to zoning does not void any leases on properties. So for the life of the lease or any renewal options, businesses would not be obviously impacted in any way.
Well, I would actually take issue with that statement, because if all of a sudden a property owner knows that they can now sell this for a total, you're taking out the car and automotive aspect of it, then they can take that property, turn it into residential, make more money. So why renew the lease? So I would disagree with that statement, but that's just my own opinion. Thank you.
Okay, Charlene?
I have a couple of things. Firstly, to build on the statement of the person just speaking before me, I'd like to know where in Jersey City are these types of businesses that you may be displacing, in her scenario in particular, that are really important to the people who live here. I mean, where else, if you go on Communipaw, it's everything related to autos. It's the glass replacement, it's Cernios, it's buy a new car, but where in Jersey City in planning are you developing an area that allows for these types of businesses to exist and thrive? Because we need these services, and yet I keep finding we keep changing the zoning into residential zoning. Well, it's great to have more people, but excuse me, people drive cars and they have need of these services. And yet we displace them or put them further out, which means they need a car to get there. And so I would like to know, in the big picture, what does planning have as an area? You know, years ago, a lot of people worked in their neighborhood because there was light manufacturing or there was warehousing, but we don't even do that anymore. Jersey City, I haven't seen developing any kind of light industry or incubator areas that allow for businesses to thrive where people can work locally. We all have to get on transportation of one sort or another to work somewhere else. So I really would like to know, not only is this an area that provides services, it probably employs a lot of Jersey City people. So my first question is, where are you in Jersey City developing this area for these types of businesses? Then I have another question. So please answer this one.
Sure. So I'll just echo again, zoning changes does not terminate leases. If the property owner, the business owner owns that property, there's nothing that makes them move. What we talked about earlier is that the industry of autos is changing significantly. So the car sales have always had auto body maintenance repair, and they're seeing that a smaller footprint can exist. They don't need as much inventory on the lot. People are ordering cars online rather than test driving them. So the footprint is significantly shrinking. City planning is permitting auto industries along in the highway commercial zone, which runs along 440 and Tunnelly Avenue. And again, it does not remove these businesses. Regarding other industrial or commercial businesses, we are preserving industrial uses, industrial zones. And it might not be on the west side, but we are seeing some thriving areas for industry. We've seen breweries come in, we've seen some distilleries that come in, we've seen furniture makers come in, old factories, and other sorts of industries, small and large. A good example is maybe a building on Wilkinson and Garfield Avenue for this type of businesses which you're talking about. So we are preserving industrial areas, and we're actively pushing against any concerns of trying to water those down.
Well, okay, I'll mull that over a bit. You know, Tunnelly Avenue is just a nightmare to access, as you well know. So things that are out there, I wouldn't go to any of those businesses on Tunnelly. It's just a scary place. At least Communipaw Avenue is much more consumer friendly. I know maybe not walkable, like Colin had mentioned, talking about access. And I would like to know how you intend to address pedestrians that need to cross Communipaw Avenue at every single one of those crossings, from the small streets on the park side to the one long block that goes from West Side all the way to Mallory. It's one long block. And then from Mallory all the way to Route 440. You know, there's no natural, except for and from Mallory all the way to 440, you have the park on one side and you have the one long block owned probably by DeFeo for the most part on the other. So where do you make multiple crossings? And then how do you get the cars to respect those crosswalks? Because I'll tell you, it's a nightmare just trying to get across Mallory Avenue over there by Carmine's. You take your life in your hands. The cars don't stop. You could be standing right in the crosswalk and they don't stop. And they're going a lot faster on Communipaw than they're going on Mallory Avenue. And I think it should be a redesign. I think they're, because there's no parking. And when you talk about this issue about parking on the sidewalks, let me tell you, they do that at McGinley Square all the time because there is no parking along the curbs. So they are pulling up on the sidewalks in order to minimize their presence in blocking the traffic. Of course, they do anyway, but they try their best. But when you don't have parking in front of these businesses, unfortunately, we have issues with people pulling up on sidewalks. And it's as if planning doesn't always, take into account the nature of people. Like maybe we need more indentations in sidewalks or something to allow these delivery trucks or people who are dropping things off to pull out of the traffic, just so that it's easy enough for the traffic to continue to flow. Or let's reduce the traffic on Communipaw Avenue, God forbid, But really, we did it to Montgomery Street. Why not Communipaw Avenue and make it all user friendly? Sorry, I know I rant.
It's theory versus reality.
So I think what we're hearing so far is that maybe there's a group of folks that might want to look at allowing some auto uses to remain along this corridor. And I think we are certainly in agreement that these are very long blocks. It's difficult when it's not a four-way intersection to warrant the crossings, but every intersection, technically a pedestrian can cross there. They're not a jaywalker. So it becomes a difficult situation, certainly. And
They could be dead.
Yeah, more than people parking or doing pullouts for cars. I think pedestrians' lives are paramount. So we definitely know that concern as well. But let's hear from some more people.
Hey, Matt, how you doing? Hello, everyone.
Hello.
It's Michael Griffin here. So, just recently moving to this area and also, living in Jersey City all my life, what I understand about that area of Jersey City is it's not only a gateway to Jersey City, but it's also a gateway to the world. So it's a lot of traffic, right? So you have tons of traffic going to Newark Airport. You have tons of traffic going to the Pulaski Skyway, hitting the drawbridges, going to Route 440. Some people even take that route to go to, the Lincoln Tunnel and even the Holland Tunnel. And, I hear talk about pedestrian safety, which is great, but pedestrian friendly. What steps have been taken to, look at how safe would it be when, traffic? I've sat there in traffic for over an hour sometimes, just trying to get to Newark, New Jersey, because, everyone goes that route. It's almost similar, if not more traffic than going into the Holland Tunnel sometimes, down on 139. So when you talk about commercial and residential, like what does that actually look like, right? Is like how, like, are we talking about like major setbacks? Even, you know, when you talk about widening the sidewalks, now you're talking about reducing driver lanes. You know, people are always pulling up on the sidewalk, which, you know, there are already no parking signs there. So also, how is that going to be enforced? And is there something in place to
He cut out for me. I don't know if for anybody
Yeah.
else.
I think he's frozen.
Okay. So
Are
yeah,
you
I guess.
now?
Oh yeah, we got you.
Okay, yeah, turn my Wi-Fi is a little shady. So I don't know where I cut out at, but as far as, you know, residential and commercial, what does that look like? Is it going to be major setbacks? Then you're talking about widening sidewalks. Is that going to reduce driving lanes? You know, then you have, when you're going west, you have, you know, on the right-hand side, you have residential, which are dead end blocks right before you get to the park. So like, what are the plans as far as enforcing proper traffic flow?
Well, in terms of enforcement, that's not our purview, but we can kind of plan things to make things flow better. Regarding the sidewalk question, so this and the setback question. So yeah, the majority of this area is 2 lanes in each direction. It's tight. So what we would do is we would have the property, the developers, any buildings set their buildings back. So the sidewalk would not come into the street. It would extend onto their property. So we wouldn't reduce the amount of travel lanes or take away from those. So that's part of that. That's a part answer to that question. And then let me see if I can think of some of the others. Francisco, do you have anything? I'm trying to, that was the one piece that I grabbed onto, and I'll see if I can.
Yeah, so I
think of some
think
others.
even in the newer projects that were approved, I believe it was 869 and 859, and they were sort of conditioned to have a bump out lane that provides parking, but also it's a safer space for loading and deliveries without interfering with traffic. I think that was the major condition that was applied during that meeting. So it was just to add also tree pits and sort of enhance the buffer between the street and pedestrians. So I think that's sort of what we're looking at when we talk about moving towards a newer zone and having more buildings sort of have the same thing as the 869 and 859. And I can, sorry, I can also share these plans with, or actually you guys all have access to it as well. It's on the data portal. I believe it's 8. Let me double check.
I can
Why
put
don't you
that
put 'em
in
the
a spot
chat?
that we could
Okay.
all look. I don't think it's, I'll put
We
that in
don't
a
have a
spot
chat?
that, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll put it somewhere that you all can see it.
Okay.
And these buildings are also under construction right now. So you'll sort of see the change happening soon. At least with that
Mhm.
one piece of Communipaw.
Yeah. And psychologically, with have the buildings setting back and the planting of street trees, it does change human behavior rather than seeing this clear expanse of you can just go as fast as you want, or you can pull up on the sidewalk. If there are plantings, if there are trees, if there are
Swells.
businesses that don't have such expansive curb cuts, you know, it just ultimately makes for a more pedestrian, a safer pedestrian experience.
Yeah, and you probably are aware of some of the shifts that in the painting on the street for Communipaw that have happened over the years. So at one point it was 2 lanes all the way up to West Side if you were going eastbound towards West Side Avenue. And I would say most people are probably aware that now the 2 lanes it kind of funnel to 1, and then there's a turn lane that opens back up. And yes, I think just from observation, there's a lot of people that that just kind of ignore the paint and go straight to the left turn area.
Yes.
But you know, there's a lot to be said that of what's called a road diet. There is minimal loss in the city to the flow of traffic or the capacity, but it's a much safer sort of street design than a 4-lane road or two lanes in each direction. Obviously, there's a lot of capacity that's needed on this corridor, so I don't think that we could this is more of a zoning question, but obviously we could reiterate the kind of importance of this corridor and people's interest in improving its safety for pedestrians and other road users to the folks at the city that do that type of work. But we have employed this road diet strategy throughout the city and other areas. And it is something that maybe you're not aware of or is new to you, and we'd be happy to share some information about that if you want to reach out to us for that.
And I do see,
Guys, can I say something?
yes.
My hand's been up for a while.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I saw.
Thank you. For number one, I want to say I'm happy that this area is being looked at, and there's going to be upgrades and efforts to kind of bring it onto the map, so to speak. So good, thank you again for doing that. I have a question about those 3 buildings that you showed, where there's, I guess, plans were submitted and they've been approved for these 6-story buildings. The one thing that struck me, and this is probably off topic, but one building was going to have 30 apartments, I think, and the others were going to have 90 and 70. And they're on the same footprint, I assume. That's like startling me too. Like, what are these? How big are these apartments going to be?
They have different footprints. I'll pull up the visual again and we can.
So there's 3 different projects on 3 separate lots.
And the lots are different sizes.
But the design sort of looks the same and it kind of blends in for 2 of the buildings. But
yeah, and I know we don't have to take a lot of time on this, but
Was there another question, Carol?
So I do remember, I'm not up on everything, but there was some pushback from homeowners on the other side of those properties, I think, that were concerned about the height of the buildings. So I assume that zoning approved the 6-story buildings, am I right?
that's correct.
So basically the homeowners are gonna have 6-story buildings in back of their houses looking down on them. So that's the way it goes, okay? Unfortunate, but. So, were you pulling up those pictures?
Yeah, if you'd like to see it. So I think.
Okay, sure.
No, go. I'll share my screen.
Okay.
You can talk.
So you're saying that so the first one, it appears to be very narrow, shaded out, but very narrow.
Yeah.
Other 2 are substantially larger, but we don't know that, exact measurements. But they do look almost 3 times bigger than the first one. Or even this last one is even larger. Okay, it was probably just my first impression. Thank you. That's fine.
Lisa, you've had your hand up for a while. Thank you for your patience.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's been some very good points made, and I just want to ask, and I apologize if you brought this up, but I agree completely with what Colin said about the minimum setback, and we have an opportunity right now to get this right. And it's gonna, whatever we do is going to be in place, for decades. So, if we miss that opportunity like we did further down on Communipaw, where we have buildings built right up against the street, we forever lose the opportunity for wider sidewalks, more greenery, as well as an opportunity for bike lanes. So I just want to, reiterate that. And also the point about traffic is, while in theory there were 2 lanes each direction, there's never, I used to make a habit of reporting all the cars parked during rush hour. And I just gave up on it because it never gets enforced. And I find it a little disheartening when, people in one department, when these things are raised, say, well, that's not our purview, because they're so intrinsically linked. And so, we have this tremendous opportunity now as redeveloped to kind of get it right and to get, to change behaviors also by enforcement, because these things just never, ever get enforced, and behaviors won't change without enforcement. And the last thing I just wanted to bring up, and again, I apologize if this was said already, but since we're making such dramatic increases to population density, right? And we have these taller buildings, these 6-story buildings going up adjacent to 1 and 2 family zoned blocks. And those blocks do not have zoned parking. What are we going to do to keep all these new residents from coming and taking up all of the residential parking for the people? Like, will there be parking, and will it be enforced that the people moving into these large buildings, if they bring cars, that they need to park them in their garage and not take up existing parking that has been used for the people in the 1 and 2 family houses?
Matt, I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
deferring to you.
Okay. So in our the block between West Side and Bergen, the 2 blocks, I guess, for that area, what we're recommending is the NC1 district. And the NC1 district does have a minimum parking requirement. However, it is in most areas, it's limited to it's limited on certain main streets, so that curb cuts can't exist on certain main streets. And so some of the feedback that we would want to hear from the community is if we would include or basically add Communipaw to a list of prohibited streets where you cannot have curb cuts. If the parking is of a concern, then that means that any lot could potentially add parking as required. But that's something that we want to emphasize should be of great concern and should come with a lot of thought, because what we're hearing a lot of is that there is concerns about pedestrian safety, and curb cuts definitely introduce more conflict for pedestrians. So if there's a interest in having more off-street parking created, as a new development perhaps comes along, then that's one way to do it in the NC, and we would want that comment coming from the community.
Yeah, we could also, to that point, we could also prohibit curb cuts or off-street parking for lots of us that are small. So this way it would only, it would just limit the amount of curb cuts that we would see. If a lot's only 30, maybe it's every lot, if it's wider than 50 feet, can do it. But this way we're not getting into such small lots with a curb cut breaking up every property.
But then where would the people in those buildings park if they don't have parking in their building?
Well, they would be able to park on street.
That's a huge problem, right? Because
Yeah.
we're bringing
So-
hundreds, even thousands of people into the neighborhood.
Mhm.
And, there are existing people here who not only have had all their sunlight taken away by tall buildings, but now will no longer be able to park on their own block.
Okay, so it sounds like we want to work towards a certain, we're hearing your feedback. Sounds like we want to work towards a certain approach towards parking.
And I think it has to come with zoned parking, right? Like, for example, in Newport, where people in Newport cannot get street zone passes. They need to park in the garages that come with their building.
Well, most of Newport is privately owned streets, so it's a bit different. They have rules for their own residents. It's a bit different here and on a public street where we don't have much zone parking yet. But that typically, in my experience, is a resident-led effort. And there are zones that are of various sizes. For example, all of the Heights is a zone. And then there's some more chopped up areas in and around like Paulshoek, for example, because I think that there was more sensitivities to some of the office buildings. So that is a big effort, and in neighborhoods where I've participated in those conversations, there's often a lot of back and forth and disagreement with residents. But if you want us to participate, we would definitely follow the lead of the community, and we would provide any sort of advice, recommendations.
Thank you. I think it does. I think it needs to be part of this conversation.
Matt, can I ask a question? You said there's going to be a larger community meeting regarding this, correct?
Well, we will be providing and publishing.
We'll be sharing a draft. We'll give
Uh-huh.
people time to review, and if there's concern or questions, interest, we'll host another meeting.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure there will be, but what I guess my question is, or my recommendation is if zoning can be a part of this meeting, because I feel like a lot of concerns that people are having does concern zoning, right? Like what their laws are, whether it comes to traffic or sidewalks, whatever.
Do you mean enforcement, Michael?
Not even enforcement, just even enforcement, they can absolutely just to get a better idea of what the goal is, because you guys absolutely are doing what you're supposed to do. You're doing your job, but at the same time, there are some questions that maybe they should ask or need to be asked, so we can get a clear view from them, and not just not only the support from you guys, but also that first party answer versus taking things back or whatever.
I'm a bit confused. We write the zoning legislation for the city. It might be a misnomer, but the Division of Zoning doesn't write the zoning legislation.
Okay.
They enforce the zoning.
Okay,
So they write summonses, they bring people to court, they approve permits. But if it's a project of a certain size, they need approval through city planning first, because we administer the land use boards. We provide the city staff that works for the land use boards of the city. So it is a bit circular, and it's common misnomer, but the Division of Zoning doesn't write legislation.
Noted.
I do see some hands raised, so.
Yeah, we have a lot.
Anyone?
Yeah,
have a
yeah, I
question?
saw Virginia, you had your hand up a little while ago. I don't know if you still want to talk.
Let's try to get everyone that hasn't spoken yet.
Yep.
I see Colin has his hand up again. We'll get to you in a moment. Tyler, I guess we'll just go from what name I see at the top of the list.
Okay.
Tyler.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I can't have my camera on. I just wanted to praise the increase in zoning here. I think this is an area that is in dire need of increased housing and increased mixed use. Right now, it is pretty industrial. I also want to echo what Colin said about just concern for pedestrian and cyclist access. You know, as more people come into this area, we need to really be providing alternatives for driving a car everywhere. Yeah, so I just wanted to echo that, you know, say that we should really be concerned with the streetscape, be concerned with all the people that are coming in, having alternatives to driving so that, you know, we don't increase the danger on our streets, we don't increase traffic, and we don't increase pain for parking.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler.
Ingrid?
I just wanted to first thank you guys, Liz, Francisco, and Matt, for taking the time to do this and for all the work on it. And I want to echo kind of some of the other comments, Tyler and Colin specifically. I think I hear and understand a lot of the concerns that folks have raised, but you know, I'm just fully in favor of we live a block away with our 12-year-old daughter. It would be really nice if we could walk on Communipaw. And so just are fully in favor of kind of the expanded sidewalks, cycling access, safety for pedestrians. So just I love the changes that are being proposed. Do you want to add anything?
Thanks.
Thank you. Talia. Sorry, I'm inverting the letters. Talia.
All good, thank you.
Okay.
I also wanted to, it's Talia, you said it well.
Okay.
I also live in this neighborhood with my 2 kids, and we also are car owners and use Communipaw a lot, and we have to drive there, and I want to really support this plan and encourage you to continue making the sidewalks wider and access to Lincoln Park. My kids, we can't walk around Communipaw, and while cars and traffic are important, I think most important is that the people who live in the neighborhood can walk around it safely. I'd love bike access, but I would settle for really good pedestrian use in an area that's very commercial and could get a lot of foot traffic to the shops if we fix it.
Thank you.
I know, Virginia, you did have your hand raised, but I didn't want to pass over you if you did have any questions.
I just want to add my voice to the person who spoke about the importance of parking. With all the development that's going on in these new buildings on Communipaw, and I mean no offense to you folks who organized this meeting. I appreciate the presentation, but I don't get the impression that you are completely aware of the difficulty of the parking situation in this area. It is increasingly, I'm fortunate, I have a driveway. It is next to impossible. I see my neighbors having to drive around and around and around and around when they come home from work at night. And I want to add my voice to the person who raised the issue with the development in the apartment buildings that are going up. It is essential that something be done about parking. It is important. The situation is only going to get worse as Jersey City grows.
Thank you, Virginia.
I think Mr. Garber, you are new. I believe everyone else who has their hand raised has spoken already. If you have any questions, feel free.
Just a quick comment. First of all, like everybody else, I appreciate the conversation. Really love the fact that work is going to be done on Communipaw to increase pedestrian traffic. I've got to tell you, just to co-sign what Virginia just said and the other speaker, it's a little disappointing, honestly, when people raise parking and there at least appears not to be forethought about, hey, what's going to happen when tons of people are added to the neighborhood? Where are they going to park? I've been on several of these types of conversations, and it always seems to catch people by surprise. I'm one of those people that would love us to reduce the number of cars so we didn't have to worry about parking. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that it gets brought up by many of my neighbors all the time. So I just want to make sure that that point is being at least listened to, so that at the point that it gets raised on some of these calls, at least it's been like, we've thought through that. Here are some options. I mean, the option that I didn't hear raised specifically is what has been done. I get the whole thing in terms of cutouts and sidewalks, but if you say, hey, listen, the way that we're going to solve for the additional number of residents is we're going to mandate that each building that goes up has X number of parking spots. It just doesn't seem like there is a ready response to those questions that come up every single time. So it makes me wonder whether or not those comments are being listened to at all.
No, we're certainly hearing them, and I think that's why we would want to know if we would be allowing curb cuts along Communipaw in these zones. It sounds like that's certainly going to be the case in the area between Mallory and West Side Avenue, but we would want to know if that's something we carry up for the remainder of the corridor. And we can talk about parking in more depth, but it often some of the studies and the findings of studies runs afoul of some people's held beliefs. There's been a study in San Francisco of people that signed up for housing, and the lottery was so long that they had to just choose whatever housing they got, whether it came with parking or not. And what they found was in a building that didn't provide parking, people that owned cars got rid of their cars, and people that didn't own cars continued to not own cars. So it runs against what some people hold as a common belief, that more people equals more cars, when there have been studies that say otherwise. And in fact, rather than increasing transportation efficiency, providing less off-street parking actually has a greater impact on decreasing car ownership than better transit service.
Right, I guess, and I appreciate that answer. The only point I'm making is that I literally would front end some of these conversations because this comment is going to come up and that people have concerns about parking. And again, I'm not educated enough to speak to whether or not that specific study applies to this region and if that also would be true here. The only thing that I'm saying is that we need to be ready to address these concerns because they're real concerns of people with parking. If we think that the solutions that other people are coming up with will not solve the parking situation, I suggest that we say that explicitly so that people either nod or feel free to disagree. The piece I feel a little disconcerted about is that sometimes it catches people unaware that this is going to come up. And trust me, it comes up literally every single time.
Yeah, I'm aware, and thank you, Mr. Garber.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments.
Okay, I think we have some repeat hands up right now. I see Colin, Charlene, Lisa, Ingrid, Tyler. And Jean, I see you physically raising your hand. Colin, if you would like to say something.
Sure. First, I just want to recognize Matt for dropping some brilliant research-based knowledge on the call right now about car ownership and building development. I drive, I park in the street. I also bike a lot all over the city, everywhere. I also like to walk to the park. We talk about traffic a lot too. And, by adding more parking capacity, you're adding more induced demand to own a car, like Matt had described, which then worsens the traffic. That's just the situation. I'm sorry to be the, counter to some of my neighbors. But I hear the same arguments all the time about people moving into the neighborhood are going to want to have a car. And that's not always the case. But I do think that these zoning changes also need to be coupled with transit and perhaps bus mapping or better public transportation options, perhaps bus stops, bus bump outs that make it easier to access buses, or bike lanes too. I mean, I would love to see a bike lane down Communipaw. I think that would be a game-changing situation, especially with access to the park right there. And if you build it to Mallory, and then we've talked about building it also on Duncan, which could potentially wrap around and connect to Montgomery, that would just be a comprehensive network that would bring you from the Hudson to the Hackensack River straight through and provide better access to the park. And then for the people moving in Communipaw, better access to light rail, even down Mallory, they can get to the light rail station and get to work. Because I don't know where these people are going to be working when they move into those units, but it's unlikely to be on Communipaw. It's unlikely to be on the west side, just being honest. So they're going to need to get out of that area. And the best way to do that is by presenting transit alternatives to having to own a car, because people don't necessarily want the expense of having to own a car, because it is very expensive. If they can avoid it, they would. But that involves building out transit alternatives for them. And I think, every time we think about a zoning change or something, that should also be part of the thinking as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Colin. We have hands up still, but I'm not sure if they were left up or if you have new comments. Speak up. Jean, are you raising your hand?
I have new comments. Sorry, this is Lisa again, and I just going back to what Colin said. I mean, certainly public transit is important. And I know the gentleman that was speaking before him, people keep putting up this exact same study that happened in California with people in a lottery for public housing. And I find it like inherently flawed that you're comparing, California and public housing lotteries and a situation where I believe there was free on-street parking or, and paid parking lot parking, because of course people are not going to use their garages if they can park next to free on the street. So I challenge you to dig a little deeper into that, and also just to recognize that right now Jersey City is not at all public transit or pedestrian family friendly, especially for families or older folks. My kids, we're south of Communipaw. My kids, we live less than a mile from their school, and I 100% will not allow them to walk to school. I feel like their very lives are in their hands. The crossing guards are unreliable, and Communipaw is deadly and terrifying. And I have zero confidence it's going to be made safe before they're adults. And so, we're back to just necessitating cars, when playing fields and children's recreation are in inaccessible places that are not near the light rail and are not near a path train and are not near, any timely kind of transportation. We still have to just work within the reality that we have right now. The other thing I wanted to say that I forgot last time is, assuming these buildings will have retail, I wonder if we can have some sort of input or encourage businesses that we really need to be in here. West Side is a fresh food desert. There's nowhere to get, fresh food or very few choices. And so, having things outside of the usual bodegas and like tattoo parlors and things that seem to frequent here would be really, really helpful. That's it. Thank you.
And I don't like hearing those comments, but I know that they are a reality that a lot of us deal with regarding a fear of safe walking conditions.
Yep. Okay, so just to be mindful of time, we have about 10 minutes left. Staff would like to give kind of a summary of what we heard. I think we have time maybe for one more person to comment.
Could I speak up, please, about the SID?
Sure, that would be great. Thank you. So Charlene and then Jean will give you the floor again, and then we'll share the staff overview of what we heard. So Charlene.
Thank you very much. And I do sit on the board of the Special Improvement District, the West Side Partnership, and they have a lot of concerns about parking opportunities. And I know that, as discussed, that these buildings may not include parking with them. Then again, they may. But again, the residents may not, in fact, take advantage of it, as many buildings have not, or residents of buildings have not, because there's free parking on the street. So is there a possibility to include on West Side Avenue the possibility of a parking deck that would allow for some of these buildings, if they don't have parking, people could rent long-term parking in the upper reaches of the deck, and then in the lower parts could be the customers of all these retail spaces that will be in the lower parts of these buildings, because we don't want to necessarily create all these curb cuts, but how about a specific area that has a curb cut? And it would alleviate perhaps the West Side businesses, which I'm surprised none of them are on this call or they haven't spoken up. They're actually looking at a feasibility study for developing those tiny little lots that do exist into parking decks, which I think is just a little overkill, too much money in a small space. But if we managed one parking deck, it might actually be serviceable to the residents in the area as well as to the consumers utilizing the area. Because again, even West Side Avenue is being considered for a bike lane, which would be great. It would be a great north-south connector, but every single business owner will be against it because you'll be taking away their parking. So if there's an opportunity to offer them some other type of parking scenario, maybe it would be more feasible to put a bike lane or safety pedestrian, as Lisa was talking about, making even West Side safer to walk on, if in fact we had parking for customers somewhere in the area.
Matt,
you.
could you do you have anything to respond to that?
So I'll just tell you from what I understand about parking decks, those municipal lots along West Side are not sized appropriately for a parking deck. It's impossible. Secondly, Jersey City owns a large surface parking lot on Central Avenue. And we went through the process of rezoning that with community meetings for a very large building, creating more parking. And it is not financeable at this point. I find little opportunity to none that there would be on properties in and around West Side for something like that without a very large effort to clear what already exists. And I don't believe that that's something that city planning would get behind. I don't know if many people in the community would get behind an effort like that. And I would dissuade us from considering that as an option. I just don't see it as a viable option. But we know that parking and business owners like to see more and more parking. We understand that push and pull, and it is a difficult one to service.
Okay. Jean?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Very good. Thank you so much. I'm going to bring up something a little different. I'm going to bring up, I want to talk about our emergency escape routes. Now, the one argument I had very much, because the Newark Pedestrian Plaza was only supposed to be closed during the evenings and on weekends. And our mayor did some kind of runaround, and all of a sudden jam through is closed all the time. The problem I have with this is that Newark Avenue was one of our emergency escape routes. Have you were able to look at Communipaw and see if that's one of our emergency escape routes? And to take that into
it most certainly is, I would have to say. We're not proposing a pedestrian plaza.
I'm just saying is that, this has to be taken into consideration. So just to think about what we can and what we cannot do in limiting access or vehicular access for those who are going to need it. That's all.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to put up this slide so y'all have some info if you need it. But we'll start to just give a quick summary of what we heard. And then we'll end the meeting for tonight. So I heard some concerns about the need for auto uses and how there's that people regularly use these areas for that purpose and have concerns with going to other areas of the city to serve that. Issues with the form of the long blocks and street crossings at Communipaw. Largely discussions about safety for those walking or biking. Some definitely some topics around zoned parking and how future residents may choose to park or bring cars to the area. And Matt and Francisco, do you have, and then also just these improvements should be coupled with further transit opportunities. Matt or Francisco, anything you'd like to add?
So I also wrote down the importance of safety for both the pedestrian and also the car user. Also possibly having some sort of minimum parking requirement, but also decreasing the amount of curb cuts that are on Communipaw between Mallory and West Side. There is the interest in increasing the sidewalk for pedestrians, whether that's making some sort of front yard setback requirement larger than what it is right now. And I think you pretty much covered the rest of it, Liz, that I had.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I don't know, I might have not heard it, but definitely gonna try to communicate that greater enforcement should be given to this area regarding cars that are parked on the sidewalk. And also to couple transportation planning considerations for parking or zone parking. Yeah, I think that was maybe the only other things I didn't hear. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it was interesting just hearing the, the different sides and different perspectives, especially when it comes to some divisive issues like parking. So it's good to hear, and we appreciate it. So we will follow up with you all with an email, if not tomorrow, then sometime next week, with some information pointing you to this presentation, a recording of this meeting, and just to give you our contact information if you'd like to reach out. And then we'll plan to share some draft language with you all, probably in February, and we'll take it from there in terms of future meetings. But I anticipate we'll see some of your faces again regarding this. So thank you all for joining.
And maybe in person if we do have it.
Yeah, maybe. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Have a nice night.
Good night.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.